Until just 5 minutes ago, no one had ever heard of Drag Queen Story Hour. But now the trend of men in wigs and dresses reading sexualized stories to small children in schools and libraries is sweeping the nation. What in the world is that about? Just a few days ago, there was a story that came out of Dallas, Texas, about a Pride Month celebration that involved bringing elementary school children into a gay strip club where men dressed provocatively as women danced for children, and the children were given dollar bills to put into the dancers' underwear. This was called a family-friendly drag show. Family-friendly, really? When toddlers are brought in to a gay club to hand out dollars to a bunch of men provocatively dancing around in lingerie in front of a pink neon sign, communicating a phrase that I cannot repeat here. Family-friendly. That's what our culture considers to be family-friendly today. Now, before I talk about this and the way it relates to even our local schools here in Oklahoma, I want to say that this is not a commentary about homosexuality. The reason I suggest that is because the direction that these kinds of things have taken finds many avowed and openly homosexual people in this country, from journalists to business people, people who practice that lifestyle and yet are deeply appalled and disturbed by what is essentially an anti-child agenda pushing for the sexualization of toddlers. There is an LGBT agenda out there, and it speaks a lot about rights and privileges and other things. But I find common ground even with some people who are self-avowed homosexuals, because what we're talking about today is a perverse agenda that is designed to destroy our children. We really should have seen this coming. We should have expected that a nation that has spent the last 60 years aborting babies, killing babies before they see the light of day, to the tune of 60 million over those 6 decades, we should have expected that the next natural result would have been to treat those children that are born as throwaways, as toys to be treated however we want, as experiments to be used for whatever perverse ideas we have. That's where we are. Drag Queen Story Hours started in 2015 in San Francisco, the most liberal city in America. But even from the beginning, there were those, even within the LGBT movement, that recognized that this is a problem. What we've come to the conclusion about now is that there is a substantial portion of the left that thinks it is not only acceptable, but that it is beneficial to expose children at very young ages to explicit sexual behavior. There is, in fact, a serious cultural project underway to undermine the traditional family. Now, if you feel that in your gut, you are not being paranoid. You're paying attention. See, there's an article that I reference at the end of this video from the Washington Times. The title of the article is LGBT Advocates Say Small Kids Need Pride Month Drag Events and Gender Talks. It's a fascinating article interviewing activists who are trying to make some sort of reasonable intellectual argument that treating children in this way is actually to their benefit. Well, because of this movement, the battle at the moment is in our schools over pornographic books, sexualized curricula, and frankly, parental rights. The left has decided that they own our children and that parents have no rights to question what is being taught in the classroom. Now, here's the problem. Before you lump all teachers together, understand that statistics tell us that there is an exit that is developing to flood proportions of students leaving the public school systems in this country, but there are also surprisingly high numbers of teachers who are leaving the public school systems, leaving in record numbers today as districts make more and more decisions that are motivated by radical sexual activist ideology rather than by education or the best interests of children. There are now books in our schools so explicit that if you or I gave that book to a minor, we could be charged with a felony. Let me say that again. There are books in our schools that if you or I promulgated, if we distributed those books to minors, we could be charged with a felony. But it's interesting that in 43 states, there are exemptions to the pornography laws which allow schools to teach that material with no legal or criminal liability. Now, the response to this has been that groups of parents began to organize and show up at school board meetings to protest, and this is brilliant. They used the simple but powerful tactic of simply reading the books in question to the members of the school boards on the record in a public forum and forcing them to confront their own agenda. I think that's a brilliant strategy. We have to force the left to acknowledge what they're doing. There's a key lesson here. To win this fight, we need to force the radicals to confront and admit what they're really up to. Eventually, this is the way the argument in return takes place. It started out with them sort of smiling knowingly at parents and saying, that's not happening, that's not here. And yet, as parents have brought assignments and reading materials and other curricula from their children's backpacks that they carry home from school, as they begin to bring those materials to the school board and read them out loud on the record for everyone to hear, the argument went from that's not happening here to, well, it's really good that that is happening here. The new strategy is to call parents racists, call them oppressive, even call them out-of-touch terrorists. Well, there is a curriculum in particular that I want to talk to you about that is in several schools across the nation, several districts. It's a training material for teachers. It's called Welcoming Schools. Welcoming Schools is a training resource that provides to teachers a document explaining how to discuss gender identity and sexual orientation with kids beginning in kindergarten, running through third grade. Now, let me tell you what that means. Gender orientation and sexual identity to children ages 5 to 8. The document has a section labeled Who You Love. And under the Who You Love section, there are definitions. Remember, this is targeted at your littlest ones. There are definitions for bisexual, heterosexual, gay, lesbian, and pansexual. There's a section in that guide labeled Gender, which defines different categories under the headings of gender expansive, gender expression, gender binary, and sex assigned at birth. There's a following section entitled Who Can Marry Whom that explores all, and I mean all, the possible scenarios, definitions for family to be defined in any way that we want. Well, the book of Proverbs has something to say about this. In Proverbs chapter 2, the author of Proverbs is talking about wisdom and how wisdom begins with knowledge that comes from the fear of the Lord or reverence for God. It's an attitude that recognizes that God is God and that you are not. So with that starting place, knowledge is made up of the facts that we assemble of the world around us. Knowledge in the book of Proverbs then moves to understanding. Understanding is our ability based on our reverence for God, to take the facts, the knowledge that we have, and to assemble it so that it has meaning, that it has purpose, that reflects who God is and how He made the world. Knowledge is the collection of facts. Understanding is the arrangement of facts so that they make sense according to a biblical worldview, and that produces wisdom. Wisdom is the course of ethical or practical action based on the facts that we have and the understanding of how God gives meaning to those facts. Now, the book of Proverbs is all about wisdom, but here's a section in Proverbs chapter 2 where the writer says that wisdom will produce discretion. That is, your ability to discern what's happening around you. He says, discretion will watch over you, verse 11 of chapter 2. Discretion will watch over you, understanding will guard you. Guard you from what? To rescue you from the way of evil, from a person who speaks perverse things, from those who leave the paths of uprightness to walk in the ways of darkness, who delight in doing evil and rejoice in the perversity of evil, whose paths are crooked, and who are devious in their ways. You see, what the writer of Proverbs is saying is that there are times in every generation where people are perverse. That is, the word perverse simply means a system of values that is opposite, inconsistent, in direct contradiction to the values that come out of the nature and character of God. In other words, in another place in the Bible, it talks about how men in their sin will call good evil and call evil good. Well, see, to mistake evil for good and to mistake good for evil, that's the biblical word perverse. It says that there are people who will hold perverse positions. Listen, whether you are a Bible-believing Christian or a homosexual who votes Democrat in every election, there is something that we can agree on, and it is that what's happening now in our schools and our libraries is that this is an anti-child agenda that is perverse. That is, it is the opposite of what is appropriate for those who are charged with caring and protecting children. In Matthew chapter 18, Jesus has this to say about little children. He says, whoever receives one such child in my name receives me. Jesus has a close identification with the little ones. He loves them dearly. Verse 6 of Matthew 18, but whoever causes one of these little ones who believe in me to sin, it is better for him that a heavy millstone be hung around his neck and that he be drowned in the depths of the sea. Woe to the world because of its stumbling blocks. For it is inevitable that stumbling blocks come, but woe to the person through whom the stumbling blocks come. Verse 10, see that you do not look down on one of these little ones, for I say to you that their angels in heaven continually see the face of my Father who is in heaven. Here's what Jesus was saying. He was saying of all the spiritual crimes that can be committed in any culture, in any generation, the damage to the innocence and the spirit of a child is, in God's eyes, one of the most serious offenses that you can have. These people who want to sexualize toddlers, who want to put things into their minds that they are not physically or physiologically or mentally or emotionally or spiritually equipped to confront, these people are perverse. If you're a parent with children in a public school system, you need to be aware of this. Now, you may be tempted, if you live where I live, you may say, whew, man, I sure am glad I live in solid red state like Oklahoma. Well, hold on. You may not realize, but the battle of parents against this anti-child curricula is being waged right here in Oklahoma, right here in our own backyard. We have local public school districts, often with professing Christians in leadership, who are moving toward outrageous curriculum choices. The local problem is that there is no media coverage, so there is as yet very little outrage on the part of Oklahoma parents. Do you know what materials in next fall are being introduced for the first time into your high school and especially into your elementary schools? Have you explored the new books, the new lesson plans that are coming online? Don't you think you need to know about those things? Have you ever attended a local school board meeting? Honestly, few parents do. And that's how this happens. If you're not interested in having to deprogram your children every day when they get home from school, you might want to go to the next board meeting of your school district's school board. You might want to know the people who are on that board and the decisions that they're making. You might want to actually read the materials and the assignments that your children and your teenagers are going to be asked to absorb, to learn, to adopt. It is perverse, and we must not stand for it. Public school systems were never meant to take our children away and teach them whatever they wanted to teach. We are citizens. We must have oversight. We must exert a voice. You quit telling yourself, well, their teacher's a Christian. Yeah, well, in our local school districts, we have administrators that claim to be Christians too, but that's not stopping this anti-child curriculum from coming in. Go find out what's happening in your school. Your children, the next generation, that's what's at stake. Find the time, make the time. You go do this. The one who protects children receives blessing from the Lord. The one who damages children either by aggressive propaganda or merely by neglect, that is a crime answerable before the throne room of heaven. This is Truth Currents.